Air signs are not personalities, they are functions. They emerge at the points of the year where survival no longer depends on instinct or accumulation alone, but on information, coordination, and shared understanding. Air enters the zodiac when life becomes too complex to navigate in isolation. Because before air, bodies must survive, resources must be secured, growth must take root, and then after air, power deepens, structures harden, consequences unfold. See, air exists in the middle, where connection determines whether the system holds or collapses. So let's think about what air actually represents. Seasonally, air corresponds to moments when movements matter more than mass, when communication determines success, when awareness must travel faster than threat, when systems must coordinate rather than dominate. See, air is the element of circulation, signal exchange, pattern recognizing, shared reality. If fire initiates life, earth would stabilize it, water would bind it, and air would keep it from suffocating. Each air sign enters at a critical transition point in the year. Gemini's late spring, Libra's autumn equinox, Aquarius is deep winter. So for Gemini being in late spring, this is when life must move, pollinate, and communicate, or fail to fruit. With Libra being autumn equinox, this is when resources are known and must be fairly distributed to prevent collapse. And with Aquarius being in deep winter, this is when survival depends on collective intelligence and innovation, not tradition. None of these are comfortable seasons, but they are decision points, because air signs are born when stillness becomes dangerous, when silence becomes a risk, when isolation becomes a liability. You see, air signs develop consciousness, not because they prefer thinking, but because thinking is acquired where they arrive in the cycle. They're shaped by environments where awareness must be fast and information must circulate and perspective must widen. Individual focus must yield to system-level awareness, which gives air signs mental agility, social intelligence, being sensitive to patterns, verbal and symbolic fluency. But it also, unfortunately, gives them that burden of overthinking, detachment, anxiety when movement ends. They hate being still, discomfort with emotional density. Because air is meant to move. It's never meant to contain. Air signs exist to translate between, as a mediator between both worlds, between the body and self, self and other, individual and collective, present conditions and emerging futures. They ask what's happening, who needs to know, how do we coordinate, what changes if this information moves. So see, without air, fire, it would burn unchecked. Earth would stagnate, water would drown itself. Air creates a relationship between the forces. Air signs are born, where survival depends not on strength or feeling, but on awareness moving faster than collapse. They're not detached because they don't care. They're detached, and they detach because clarity is how systems survive. Gemini connects the parts, Libra balances the whole, and Aquarius reinvents the future. Together, air signs form the intelligence layer of the zodiac, the breath that allows the cycle to continue. So with Gemini, to really understand Gemini, we have to stop at the moment they arrive in the year, not the personality traits that come later. Gemini only makes sense when you understand late spring as a developmental environment, not a vibe. I'm going to go a little slower here, a little more anatomical. My brain's not working all the way. This is why Gemini exists at all, okay? Gemini is born after Taurus. It's the first air sign. Gemini is born after Taurus, has stabilized survival, but before Cancer establishes emotional continuity. And I think that placement is everything. Because the cycle kind of looks like with Aries, we have emergence, raw life force, see? With Taurus, we have securing resources, bodily stability. With Gemini, we have movement, exchange, circulation. And with Cancer, we have bonding, protection, memory. Gemini arrives at the first moment when life becomes mobile. Nothing's settled yet, but everything is connected. And see, late spring is the time where the ground is warm but not predictable. Growth is rapid and uneven. We see storms suddenly coming. Pollination is frantic and everything's communicating. Insects, winds, birds, plants exchanging pollen. This is the first season where relationship replaces survival as the main task. The Gemini is not here to feel yet. Gemini is here to connect the system. This is the core metaphor most astrology, I think, misses. Because if the year was a body, we would see Aries being the birth and impulse, and Taurus would be the digestion, like the storage. Cancer would be the heart, the womb, the memory, and Gemini in the middle, Taurus and Cancer would be the nerves, the lung, the circulation. Gemini exists to move information, to exchange signals, to keep parts of the systems aware of each other. And that's why Gemini rules hands, arms, lungs, speech, nervous system. They're literally born into the season of breath and signal. See, late spring is too fast to integrate fully. A creature that stops to reflect, it gets left behind. So Gemini ends up developing peripheral awareness and recognizing patterns extremely fast, and rapid language formation and humor as a social glue. And for them, it's not emotional avoidance, it's ecological adaptation. The world Gemini enters requires to notice everything and to make your choice later. Late spring, it carries a very specific tension, right? Growth is happening, but nothing's complete. Fruit hasn't formed, shelter isn't finalized. So Gemini is a sign that kind of internalizes this baseline state of I live in transition, which ends up creating adults who are very comfortable in between spaces, and they will thrive on things having spontaneity, and they'll struggle with things being very final, and they'll get restless when things stagnate, because stagnation feels like death, since late spring equals motion or collapse. And this is why Gemini doesn't trust stillness, because in late spring, stillness often signals like a storm coming or a break in growth. If everything is very still and there's a turn like that, it's that type of energy, a threat to pollination, a disruption in exchange. So Gemini, their nervous systems learn early on that silence means something is wrong, which is why they talk when they're anxious, they multitask to self-regulate, they need background noise, they fear emotional vacuum. Stillness for Geminis isn't peace, it's uncertainty. And see, Gemini is a sign that lives in immediate time. That's the relationship to time, not like cyclical time. Aries is kind of the sign that lives like the now. Taurus lives like in the slow now. Gemini lives in the changing now. Cancer lives in remember, nostalgic now. So Gemini acts what's going on this minute. They're not future oriented like Sagittarius or past oriented like Cancer. They're present scanners, if that makes any sense. And this is why Gemini cracks under pressure, because when exchange is blocked, when there's no conversation, movement, curiosity, no air, Gemini panics, almost like the air is being taken out of them, because late spring organisms, they can't circulate, wilt. When they can't, they fail to pollinate, they'll die before bearing fruit, and under pressure, Gemini fragments, not because they're weak, but because their role is circulation, not containment, not meant to contain. Gemini lives and thrives seasonally in environments that more so resemble late spring, when they're lively but not rigid, when they're structured but not flexible, when they're curious, not possessive, when there's social environments without demand, when they're really mentally stimulating without emotional flooding. And so this is why for Gemini children, they do best when they're asked questions instead of giving lectures, or if they're allowed to move while learning, when they're given language before emotional weight, and they're allowed to change their minds. Gemini was born into the part of the year where life survives by staying in motion. So their spirit learned early that stopping means risk. And it's not a personality flaw, it's a seasonal inheritance, which is why I bring everything back to the seasons and things we can actually measure in our observable reality. Gemini is not the think of the zodiac. Gemini is the messenger between states of being. They arrive when the world needs information to move, systems to communicate, life to stay light enough to keep growing. They don't settle because they're not meant to. They connect so that the rest of us can move. And then we get to the next air sign, Libra. Libra enters at the exact midpoint of the solar descent. Not just fall, not just autumn, but the equinox. And when you think about seasonally, the equinox is the only point in the year where day and night are equal, light and dark hold the same weight, neither dominates, and that balance is temporary. And I think that last part is so crucial. The balance is temporary. Libra is born at a moment that cannot last. Balance exists, but only if it's recognized, right, protected, and adjusted. So Libra's consciousness is shaped by this underlying truth of equilibrium is not natural, so it must be maintained. Going into the scales, consistently tipping. We think about what the earth was actually doing during Libra time, and we want to ground it physically. Let's think about Libra season. This is a season where harvest has already occurred, right? Food stores are becoming visible. People know what they have. Winter is coming, but it's just not yet here, which kind of in a way creates the first moral moment of the year. The earlier signs, right, they would have dealt with, for Aries to Cancer, survival from, Aries and Cancer, survival, growth and expression, Leo and Virgo. Libra is the first sign where the question becomes, how do we organize ourselves so we all make it through? What's next? And that's not really personality, right? When you think about it, that's civilization. And that's why Libra is associated with law, marriage, and agreement. Because historically, contracts, alliances, and treaties emerge after resources are what? Counted. You can't make agreements until you know what exists, who has what, who needs what, and what's fair. So Libra enters the pictures when numbers are known, the stakes are visible, and the consequences of imbalance become real, which is why Libra governs law, justice, marriage, diplomacy, social contracts. They're not romantic idealists, they're survival mechanisms. People born under Libra internalize the system, however, as a nervous system reality. And this is a psychological imprint of being born at this time. Because deep inside, there is awareness that excess leads to conflict, that hoarding destabilizes the group, that favoritism fractures trust, and that unchecked power invites collapse. So Libra's children, and I have one, often grow up very hyper-aware of fairness, very sensitive to tone shifts, very alert to emotional imbalance, and very disturbed by injustice, even small ones. I always thought that I was sensitive to tone shifts. My child is way more, and I never thought someone could be more sensitive to the shifted energy than me, honestly. But they feel when something's off before they can even explain it. And this is why Libras feel responsible for the room. In seasonal logic, Libra is the first sign where individual desire must yield to group cohesion, and raw instinct must be negotiated, and power must be legitimized. So Libras, they often unconsciously take on this role that if I don't manage the balance, something's going to fall apart. So this is why they end up mediating, smoothing, translating, de-escalating, pausing before acting. They're not avoiding conflict, they're preventing collapse. And this is why indecision is actually a seasonal burden. At the equinox, the future direction is not yet obvious, right? Like you're still wondering, will winter be harsh? Will storms last? Will alliances hold? But Libra inherits this uncertainty. So psychologically, they wait for more data. They scan multiple outcomes. They resist premature commitment because deciding too early in Libra season could mean choosing wrong and paying for it all winter. Indecision here is not weakness, it's risk management. And that's why Libra struggles with urgency culture. My daughter cannot handle being rushed. Modern culture, right? We think about it rewards speed, decisiveness, strong stances, singular narratives. But Libra comes from a time where slowing down saved lives, and listening prevented war, and compromise ensured survival. So Libras often feel very rushed by the world and misjudged as passive and penalized for nuance. They're built for systems, not sound bites. And that's the thing. That's the shadow of Libra season. Every season has a cost. Libra's shadow is over-responsibility and having suppressed anger and self-erasure in the name of peace. They'll erase themselves just to get some peace. And they'll have a fear of tipping the balance by choosing themselves. Because when balance is your job, rest just feels dangerous. And that's why many Libras burn out quietly. But see, Libra's growth comes when they realize this truth, I think. That balance that excludes the self is not balance. It is sacrifice. Just like people say love. Love without loving yourself is not, really foundational. Seasonally, this is a transition where Libra must make from managing equilibrium externally to embodying fairness internally. And when that happens, Libra stops holding the scales alone and starts teaching others how to hold their own weight. And that's Libra's place in the Zodiac story. In the Zodiac's narrative arc, I would say Libra's the pivot. Because before Libra, the self is forming, and after Libra, power, death, and consequence emerge. Scorpio is a sign onward. So if Libra fails, the cycle collapses into resentment and hoarding and power struggles and emotional decay. See, Libra is that bridge between abundance and survival. Libra's born at the moment when having enough is no longer the question. Sharing it wisely is. So Libra doesn't come into the world to be liked. They come in to measure, weigh, legitimize, stabilize. They're not decorative, they're structural. Which leads us into our last air sign, Aquarius. Aquarius is what it means to be born in deep winter, and that's why that creates revolutionary consciousness. Aquarius enters at midwinter, the coldest, harshest, most unforgiving part of the annual cycle. This is not the beginning of winter, Capricorn. This is not the thaw of Pisces. This is the crisis point. By Aquarius season, stored resources are dwindling. The tribe knows if they're going to make it or not. Survival depends entirely on collective intelligence. And innovation becomes mandatory, not optional. Because Aquarius is born to the season where if we keep doing what we're doing, what we've always done, we die, right? At Aquarius time, individual survival is basically impossible. The collective must function as one system. Everyone's survival depends on everyone else, and you cannot hoard your way through this. You need group genius, which creates a psychological environment where the individual dissolves into the network. Ideas become more valuable than having physical strength. Innovation is rewarded over tradition. Detachment becomes a survival skill because you can't afford to be clouded by emotion when stakes are this high. It's not just about you, it's about us all. Aquarius is born to season when collective intelligence determines who lives and who doesn't. And when I really think about it, it's very interesting because my stepfather is an Aquarius and he's the last of all of his siblings. And there's something about that to me and how much he embodies the Aquarius type of traits and him being like the last. And, I don't know, there's just something there for me that I'm going to have to think through. But this is why Aquarius sees humanity, not individuals. Spring, summer signs, they see the self, personal relationships, individual growth, right? Autumn signs, they see social contracts, fairness, distribution. Winter signs, we see the systems, the structures, the survival. But Aquarius specifically, it sees networks, patterns across groups, what benefits the whole, even at individual cost, which is why Aquarius feels very distant in just one-on-one relationships. And they come alive in group settings, and they think of humanity in terms rather than just this person. And they can seem cold when they're actually thinking at scale. They're not avoiding intimacy. They're wired for collective survival. See, this is why Aquarius is the revolutionary. Because in deep winter, two things happen. One, the old ways are tested, and if they're not working, they're abandoned. And two, new solutions must be invented, or what? Everyone dies. This is why Aquarius consciousness is inherently anti-tradition, because tradition that doesn't work, is dangerous. And why they're future-oriented, because the present isn't working, and why they detach from how things have always been, and they're willing to break systems that no longer serve. Aquarius doesn't rebel for drama. They rebel because stagnation in winter is literally, can't say it to me so many times, death. And this is the burden of being born in the coldest season. This is what Aries carries. They're born at the moment when emotion is literally a liability. When it's 20 degrees and food is running out, you can't afford being sentimental. You can't make decisions based on attachment. You have to think clearly, objectively, and systematically, which will create this emotional detachment as a nervous system default, and having discomfort with neediness or dependency, and a tendency to intellectualize feelings and alienation from their own emotional body. See, Aquarius doesn't lack feelings. They suppress them to think quickly and clearly, because that's what winter demanded. In deep winter, right, being rigid, it kills. And this is why Aquarius needs freedom. It's not selfish. If the water source freezes, you find another, right? If the shelter fails, you're going to build it differently. If the leader is wrong, you're going to replace them. Aquarius inherits this as, I must be free to adapt or I will die. Which is why they end up resisting control and they leave relationships that feel confining and in autonomy even within connection. And they panic when pinned down. It's not commitment phobia, it's adaptive intelligence encoded as instinct. See, Aquarius is right before Pisces. Pisces is the solution, surrender, the end of the cycle. Aquarius knows the system is ending. This creates an urgency around fixing what's broken and this need to solve problems now and a fear of emotional overwhelm, which is kind of like Pisces, and the drive to maintain clarity until the very end. When Aquarius detaches, part of them is asking, if I feel too much, will I lose the clarity I need to survive? And this is why Aquarius needs community, but they still struggle with intimacy because Aquarius thrives in groups, networks, collective projects, shared missions, but they struggle very hard with one-on-one emotional depth and being vulnerable, being needed, and romantic dependency. Because deep winter survival is communal. It's not romantic. You need a tribe. You need many minds. You need distributed intelligence. But you can't afford to be so attached to one person that their loss will destroy you. Aquarius loves humanity. They're terrified of needing one human. And we look at the gift of Aquarius season. The gift is that Aquarius carries the wisdom of the innovation point. They remind us that systems must evolve or die. That the collective is smarter than the individual. That detachment is not coldness, it's clarity. That freedom and belonging can coexist. That the future is built by those willing to break the past. Aquarius is not cold. They're devoted to survival through evolution. Every season has a cost. And Aquarius shadow season is over intellectualizing, having emotional avoidance, disguising that as rationality, alienating or disassociating heavily from their body, loneliness masked as independence, and burnout from carrying the future alone. Because when your job is to save the collective, your own needs feel irrelevant. See, Aquarius' growth comes when they realize the revolution includes my own heart. Seasonally, this is the transition that they must make from detachment as armor to detachment as spaciousness that includes feeling. And when that happens, Aquarius stops being that lone genius and becomes the one who shows us how to be free and connected. See, Aquarius is born at the moment when only collective innovation can ensure survival. And they carry the question, am I willing to feel, or will clarity cost me my humanity? You see, air is the breath that keeps the cycle alive. Air does not build the world. It does not anchor it. It does not feel it into being. Air makes sure the world remains intelligible. Across the year, air only appears when the system reaches a point where instinct is no longer needed. These are moments when life must coordinate, not just react, when awareness has to move faster than threat, faster than decay, faster than collapse. Gemini ensures the system stays connected while it grows. Libra ensures the system stays balanced once resources are known. Aquarius ensures the system evolves when survival is no longer guaranteed. So together, they form a single function: circulation under pressure. Air does not ask us to feel more. It asks us to notice where information is blocked, where dialogue has stopped, where systems are out of balance, where tradition is overriding reality, where silence has become dangerous. Air intervenes when movement stalls, perspective narrows, power concentrates, complexity is denied. Its message is always the same: if awareness does not move, something will break. And the cost of ignoring air is that when air is suppressed, Gemini is going to fragment. Libra collapses into false peace. Aquarius turns cold, isolated, or extreme, and systems become rigid, dogmatic, emotionally flooded, or emotionally barren, and unable to adapt, prone to sudden failure. This is not because air is unstable. It is because air is the first thing lost when control replaces coordination. Mature air is not constant motion. It is intentional circulation. It knows when to speak and when to listen, when to detach and when to engage, when to challenge and when to stabilize, when to think and when to yield to feeling. Integrated air, it doesn't hover above life. Instead, it moves through it. It carries meaning, perspective, and possibility between parts that would otherwise collapse inward as part of our ecosystem. Air exists so that no part of the system has to survive alone. It's not shallow, uncommitted, avoidant. It is the breath that keeps the cycle conscious. Without air, life may continue, but it does not coordinate. And without coordination, even the strongest systems will eventually fail.